Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar about diversity in education recruitment. Over the next 45 minutes, we'll be introducing our panelists and then going through a few questions about how we can increase the diversity in our education recruitment efforts and why it's even important, what are all the benefits that we'll reap from it. So just to kick us off, I'll introduce myself. I'll be your host. I'm Oren, co-founder of Zen Educate. We started Zen Educate in 2017, and our goal was to provide schools with recruitment services that they expected, but faster, better, and cheaper than what they were getting from the traditional recruitment model. We're a social enterprise, and to date, we estimate we've saved schools over £1.5 million, working with over 600 schools around the country. I'll hand over to the panelists now to introduce themselves. So Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning everyone. I'm Nicole Reid. I'm the Executive Head Teacher of New Wave Federation. We're 3 primary schools in Hackney, and I've been in this role for the past 2 years, and I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion in education, but also ensuring that we provide an excellent education for the children who attend our schools.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nicole. Kemi?
Hi, thank you, Oren. Hi, good morning. Thank you to Zen Educate for inviting me to be part of your webinar today. I'm Kemi Arogundade. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Association of BAME Business Leaders in Education. We're a fairly new organisation who formed earlier this year to address the low representation of BAME professionals in school business leadership. Our aims are to promote and support diversity within the school business leadership profession and create pathways also for aspiring business leaders. I'm also a school business manager in a primary school based in South London, and also a governor at a special school in Croydon. I'm also passionate about improving diversity in the education sector. I think it leads to better teamwork and more successful decision making, and I don't think there's never been a better time for schools who want to improve diversity to really commit to this. So I'm really glad to be part of this discussion today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kemi. And last but not least, Karen.
Good morning, everybody. Again, thank you to inviting me, and thank you to all those people who are joining us online today. I'm Karen Burns. I'm Chief Executive of Victorious Academies Trust. We are a Greater Manchester-based trust with 9 primary schools working with us. And as a board, we have identified that we want to improve the level of diversity within our staffing, within our schools. And we find ourselves in areas where there isn't a prevalence of diversity within schools and within the education sector around us. So we are certainly working to address that balance and to improve our position with regard to our recruitment and the level of employees and the level of diversity within our organisation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Karen. So to kick us off, I think just so that you know what we'll speak about today, diversity among educators, why it's important, what we can do to actually improve the diversity, and not just in recruitment, but once they're actually in, what can we do about managing our staff that we've already recruited and encouraging more people to stay in the profession and progress, maintaining diversity kind of across the whole spectrum of roles in schools. So to start off with a bit of stats, BAME teachers make up...
Sorry, before we jump in, just a heads up. Hi guys, I'm Anjali. Just a heads up that I'll be monitoring the Q&A and chat. So if you have any questions, keep asking them throughout the session. Both Oren and I will keep a view on it. And in addition to the questions that were submitted, we'll pick these up for discussion as well. So please feel free to add your questions as we go along.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Anjali. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. So first stat to share, BAME teachers make up 13% of teachers, but are 21% of the overall working age population. So underrepresented there. And if we're going to talk about this, I think it's best that we all start from the most important question, which is, why should we encourage diversity in recruitment in schools? And Kemi, I thought I'd start with you, first of all.
Thanks, Oren. Like I said earlier in the intro, I think that diversity is a great thing. I think that we have a responsibility to the children in our school to better prepare them for the wider community, whether they're in a diverse setting at school or have diverse staff, you know, at the school that they attend. When they grow up and be adult and they're adults, they are going to travel, they're going to meet new people, a wide variety of people. And I think that they should understand that diversity is something that to celebrate, not to tolerate. And it's important for us to teach our young people right from an early age that we need to be able to live together and be understand that equality is important.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kemi. Nicole, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, you know, for me, diversity is the core need for all of our children and for everyone in society to function. And whilst, you know, the statistics out there are saying something else, I'm very positive because it was just yesterday on Radio 4, I was listening to a report, and, you know, BAME teachers in school, I can't quite remember if it's primary or secondary school, are on the increase and is broadly in line, but even more so than ever, we need to ensure that we are having a diverse teaching staff in our school, and this is the good for everybody, and it should be, you know, something that we actively support rather than, you know, this awkward issue around diversity. We should be celebrating it and ensuring that this is an acceptable basis for recruitment, that we are out there saying we're recruiting a diverse community. Just like if I want to have a great maths leader in my school or a great science teacher in my school, I go out there and I recruit for that, and therefore diversity is part of my core recruitment strategy. I want to have a diverse school community, therefore I'm going out there to actively recruit for the very best and for a diverse staff, and that's what I do, because, you know, I totally agree. Yeah, we need to celebrate it and not tolerate it in our schools.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nicole. Anything to add, anyone? Karen, do you want to add anything?
I completely agree with what Kemi and Nicole have said, and I think there is a real place for, as Nicole has pointed out, that there is a criterion, there is you know, a need for us to have staff who have different skills, different expertise, different areas of knowledge, and equally different cultural backgrounds, race, belief, because in order for our society to function wholeheartedly, children need to be exposed to that, and children need to understand that just as much as they need maths, English, a geography lesson. All of that is key skills. All of those come together to give them the skills to adapt to community as they leave school, as Kemi has pointed out, and as they get into the wider world. Actually understanding and celebrating diversity is a key skill, and we need to raise that as we do in terms of the academia. So I think it's a really valid point that Nicole said, that children should have those experiences, and actually we're limiting their understanding of the world by not having the appropriate level of diversity within our organisations.
Brilliant. I think that's excellently put. So if it's so important, it's such a core skill, next question is, how do we expand the reach of our job posts and generally our efforts of finding applicants so that we get a more diverse pool of applicants to start with? Karen, do you want to go from there?
Yes, certainly. I think that something that has happened over the course of the last few years has been that we've seemed to have developed a recruitment pattern that has become more localized. So when I was first coming out of university in the 90s, you know, we didn't have the internet as it performs now. It was very minimal, and we would be going down to the newspaper shop on a Friday to get the tests, and test jobs would have pages and pages of jobs, and those jobs would be anywhere across the UK essentially, and you'd get your highlighter out and sit on a university floor with your friends and see what was appropriate and what you might be interested in. But of course then positions might flag up in different areas, in different types of communities, different elements of society that may not have been where you would particularly preempt that you would be, but it might just flag up a little bit of interest. I feel that now, and I know we are very guilty of this as a trust, they've become much more localised in terms of advertising. For a start, I don't think that we're using the national recruitment advertising mechanisms as we used to. So, and often that comes down to the pricing, certainly not making aspersions on any particular organisation or company, but it does cost more to have a national ad. So with school budgets as they are, we're always looking to tighten up, and you can get much more cost-effective recruitment advertising on a local level. And often I think our positions are just getting posted on, for example, My Council Jobs, which is the boroughs of Greater Manchester. And that's where people would go within their area to look for jobs. So I sometimes worry that perhaps we're not having that movement across the country and from different localities that we maybe had before, because I do feel that recruitment has become more geographically boundaried than it maybe was years ago.
Okay, interesting points, and I wonder, like, if it's kind of up to the applicants to look at different local authorities now if they want to find jobs elsewhere. Nicole, what's your experience, and what do you do to increase the reach of your job posts? Sorry, Nicole, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was trying to block out the playground noise, but I don't think I'm going to. You just have to bear with that for a minute. They will go inside soon. So, you know, it's a challenge for us because teaching, there's so many routes into teaching and different ways of coming into the profession. And so from a school's point of view, you know, organizations that we work with and universities that we work with to get teachers into the profession, so newly qualified teachers coming through the IT route, you know, those organizations, you know, it's the question that what's their strategy in recruiting teachers into the profession and what they're doing to ensure that we have a diverse group of individuals coming in to do it. Because most schools, especially in London, go to these organizations for teachers because they're either a Teach First participants or somebody coming from, you know, the apprenticeship route, and therefore what we see is that they're just coming in and they reflect a particular group rather than a diverse group. And for me, what I do is challenge that and make that bold statement that I want somebody who's going to be a role model for my children, who are going to really support their emotional well-being, and not that other colleagues can't do that, but I feel that having a more diverse staff will allow them to do that, and therefore I reject applications if I don't think it will meet the needs of my school. So I make these very bold statements around what we need to, what as a federation we need to have in order to support our children, and it's always down to the need of the school. And that's what I do with all the recruitment, whether it's through ITE provision or whether it's through an advert. And I think it needs leaders to make those bold steps and say, this is what I'm doing, and ask themselves those questions and challenge their own thinking about what they are doing in order to address this lack of diverse pool of candidates. But we also have to be realistic and understand that if there aren't applicants out there, there aren't applicants out there. And what we're then now doing to support more people to go into the profession, whether it's tracking them when they leave sixth form, going into university, what is kind of the early intervention that will allow these applicants to start applying for the job and removing those barriers, because we know that, you know, people from an ethnic minority background do face greater barrier than their colleagues. That's what the data is telling us, and we need to challenge that thinking. Thank you.
Right. Brilliant. Kemi, anything to add to that, especially if you're trying to get business managers, which is another different from the teaching assistants that you might recruit?
Yeah, I think that we sort of need to not overlook the fact that there are people applying, there are BAME people applying for these roles, and that there are barriers that are preventing them from being selected, from being shortlisted. I think we need to reduce the risk of making decisions based on bias, whether that's conscious or unconscious. I think bias can affect our judgment in problematic ways, and it comes when it comes to recruitment, it can prevent workforce diversity. It can lead to rational decision making, and it often starts before recruiters have even met with candidates. For example, name bias. Unfortunately, research still shows that job applicants with white sounding names are twice as likely to be shortlisted for interviews. If you have an ethnic sounding name, such as mine, for example, you may be more likely to be faced with the challenge of having assumptions made about you before you're met with, and about your suitability for the role. I think that I think schools really need to seek to improve their diverse, if they're looking to improve their diversity, they really need to seek to look at their recruitment practices and find ways of reducing the risk of bias in decision making. I know that Zen have introduced functionality on your website where it encourages blind recruitment, and it's an effective way to recruit more diverse staff, removing identifying factors such as age, ethnicity, gender from an application before shortlisting can make it easier for the candidate to feel like they're going to be judged based on their merit and not necessarily their protected characteristics. So I think that yes, there are people applying for these roles, and we need to look at the barriers and breaking those barriers down.
Brilliant. And so just to kind of summarize quickly, a few points. One, Karen said, kind of step out of what's easy and just local and try to go a bit wider and find applicants from other places. Nicole, you said be very clear about wanting to have a diverse staff and demanding that they actually provide the right role models that you need at your school, and that can change from school to school. And also, Kemi, you said there's conscious bias and unconscious bias. We need to be aware of, because maybe people are applying, but they're just not getting through yet, right? And then Nicole, you also mentioned got to start earlier. Like if we start earlier, set a good example for people, make them want it sooner, we'll have more people applying. Makes sense. I think one question before I move into this question that's on the screen actually was for Karen. We spoke about this beforehand, and I wanted your take on what should you do about staff diversity when the school community isn't necessarily diverse?
Yeah, so this is a particular problem for us, because my belief is that diversity actually is even more important in communities that are not particularly diverse, because often we find statistically that staff groups kind of reflect and mirror to a degree the community in which the school is serving. Now, of course, that has its positives, because the groups and the different elements of the community are reflected within the school environment. But the problem that I have, where the context and the population of many of my schools is white British, predominantly so, that for me means that we have an even bigger pressure to improve that diversity and to increase diversity, because if I don't, as I've mentioned previously, expose my young people to that and increase their understanding and knowledge of the different backgrounds and cultures, then that's not going to break that cycle. And actually, we really need to challenge as well some of the beliefs, and the parenting can often, unfortunately, encourage the bias that Kemi has referred to. And if children are surrounded by that and in a very narrow population mix as such, then for me, as schools, we have a huge responsibility to show children that actually society as a whole is much bigger. There is a much wider breadth of diversity, and perhaps the particular locality they live in, the estate that they are on, within a 3-mile radius, that's not reflected, but actually there's a much wider world out there. And of course, unfortunately, coupled with some of the locations where I'm working and the geography is deprivation. And so many of my pupils are not moving beyond the estate. They don't get to travel. They're not even stepping into other cities within the UK, let alone further afield from that. And so we almost, I feel, have a greater challenge, because we almost have to bring that into the school. We have to make those, for better word, those false experiences. We need to bring society in the wider world and the wider elements of the UK into classrooms and into their living world, because it isn't going to take place in their home environment, not only in terms of practicalities and the type of people they will meet and come across and hear about and all the wonderful experiences. That is hugely limited, and unfortunately so are some of our parents' beliefs. And of course it's certainly not across the board, but we do have families where parents are not perhaps embracing diversity as we would want them to do, so we have that additional challenge.
Brilliant. Some really important points there, Karen. Thank you for sharing that. The challenges that are not often spoken about. On the point of kind of localized recruitment that you raised, I think we had a comment in the Q&A where someone was asking, are the ITTs actually encouraging more localized recruitment because you end up working where you trained, or at least in the same area? Nicole, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, and that's something that we have to encourage amongst young people who are training, that we have to consider their location as well, because they don't, a financial reason, you don't want them to having to travel very, very far. And what we do, we actively ensure that we recruit not just based on the locality, but also recruit based on the needs of the school. So not because you live near the school and you want to train near the school, if that's not you're not the right fit for the school, then unfortunately the school, you won't be recruited. And we have to make sure we take that into consideration. And I know it's a lot easier for us in London, where we have, a bigger pool of ITTs in comparison to a rural area or an area where we don't have many people going into the profession. But that's not what we've noticed in the area in Hackney where we are.
And so maybe to kind of go back to Karen's original point about only recruiting from your local area, maybe a possible solution is having ITTs kind of partner up and across regions to help increase diversity and help kind of movement nationally.
Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. So moving on a bit, and Kemi took us into this already by mentioning the bias. So once you kind of get the word out and increase the reach of your recruitment efforts, you get into the actual recruitment process, where Kemi mentioned sometimes there's bias just based on names, maybe things that you see on the CV. What can we do in the recruitment process to improve the diversity? So once the candidates are already in, and Kemi, you started us off by talking about unconscious bias. Are there any other things you think we should be doing in the process itself?
Yeah, I think schools can. I think schools need to sort of actively engage in these matters and train educators to understand how and why diversity is important. School leaders need to understand their positions that they hold. They hold an inherent privilege, and I think that it takes courageous leadership. Leaders need to be proactive in providing sort of improving diversity amongst their staff, whether that's by diversifying their curriculum, for example, or dealing with the children's questions or misunderstandings that they may have about diversity. So I think staff need to develop language skills as well, and confidence to engage in these matters. It is an ongoing process of learning, but I think it's also an ongoing process of unlearning. There needs to be some unlearning, and efforts to improve diversity in work is work in progress. It shouldn't be treated as a sort of one-off project or a tick box exercise. I think all educators should get out there and intentionally and actively seek to network and engage with others working in education. There are various platforms online. I find one that suits you. I think Twitter, for example, is a great example of a way to network and engage with people from a variety of backgrounds and even different countries. When our children sort of look back at their education, how wonderful would it be if they could say that they had a true reflection of society, that when they now, once they're adults, and if regulators, governors, school leaders were from a range of wide backgrounds and who understood and appreciated that cultural difference is something to celebrate, and really seeing that reflected in the decisions made about school policies and staffing and curriculum. So yeah, I think that schools can look internally and have a look at some of their policies and see if there are any restrictions there as well.
Okay. And Nicole, you're obviously very passionate about this, and you spoke earlier about how sometimes you have to be firm about what you need in your school. What do you do as a CEO of a number of schools to make sure that that happens in that kind of trickles down to all the recruitment processes in the different schools?
Because it goes back to my initial point around consider the needs of your school. That's what our driving force will be. We believe that all schools must have a very diverse staff. That's fundamental in our organisation. The school staff must be diverse for social awareness, multicultural reason. We know as professionals that ideals and ideas cannot survive if many of them exist in this narrow cultural experiences, and we need to broaden that experience for our staff and for our children. So and sometimes you have to allow people to come to those conclusions themselves. It's not about imposing my views or my ideas on anyone, but it's about allowing them to make themselves more aware, to read more, to be more informed, and to come to their own conclusion. And then they understand the need and the drive that we have around diversity in our school. So as I said before, it just goes down to the need of your school. Just as how we want our children to have a really good quality education, we need to ensure that they have a good quality, diverse staff to support them with their emotional needs, their social needs, and their cultural needs as well.
Brilliant. And Karen, what are some of the examples that you do with your school leaders to kind of get that message across or give them the chance to increase their awareness, like Nicole was just saying?
Yeah, so we feed back to our heads so my chief ops officer leads on recruitment and on staffing and HR. And so we're always feeding back where we have that need, not only across the trust, but in specific schools. And I'm pleased to say that we have really done well in terms of increasing. We have some non-binary teachers now in our trust. We have a range of different ages and different backgrounds. So we are certainly making it forward. But I think making those heads acutely aware that as a trust we are conscious of this, and making them conscious of it so that they put practice in place in their schools, because obviously the overarching data from the trust stems from the 9 separate organisations that feed into it, and our heads do a lot of themselves about positive recruitment and about the mechanisms that we have in place. We have some practical measures similar to what Kemi referred to earlier. For example, if it's a paper-based exercise, when panels are shortlisting with governors, we do remove the personal data. So what would have and if it's done electronically, our admin trust would remove that information from what would be the first 2 or 3 pages sections of the application form. So in the initial shortlist, there are only a certain element of the application form that would be shared, so that we are literally looking at that person's vision, their ethos about education and what they have to offer to our pupils. So that's another way that we try and remove the unconscious bias. But I suppose now, reflecting and thinking about what Nicole was saying in terms of actually looking for that, then we need to be careful that we then don't remove all elements, and so we don't know, particularly if that person could be. So, but then we would have the face-to-face interviews, and we would then give candidates an opportunity to talk to us about what they can offer our pupils, and that I think is where that would come across the most. So I think we probably at the administrative stages, whether it be electronically based, paper based, depending on the governors who were shortlisting, we would keep it to the information. And then once the candidates have been shortlisted and arrive at the school, we do make sure that there is a real, although we have our own questions for candidates, which are obviously important, we do really try to include quite an element for that candidate to speak to us and talk to us about what they feel important, why they feel they fit for the school, rather than us just firing questions at them. Because I think that really does inform your decision making, and I think it gives you a much clearer picture of how that person would fit into the school. So there's a few layers that get to that end outcome, I think would be my main message. And make sure you really do get everything involved to make that decision. It's important.
And can I just add there, Karen? Yes, I reckon, that the anonymous kind of removal of key information to avoid that unconscious bias, but I also recognize that people make assumptions, so because it's not there, we assume. So we have to also be mindful that when we remove certain information, then we're not creating in its own this assumption that this person, because they've got this qualification or because they've studied at this place, they are of this particular, cut. And so we can't just say anonymize things, because it then just causes another set of assumptions being made. And when people assume things, then we know that what the troubles that may cause.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Brilliant. Thank you for those guys. And I think, Nicole, what you said is we have to be careful when we're removing some heuristics that people use, they might replace them with others. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Brilliant. So moving on, I think once people are actually in the school, so you've gone through the recruitment, they've passed the recruitment process, they're working in the school. One of the things that we know from research, and this isn't just in education, it's across other industries as well, is often people from minorities, they don't have the same role models or the same examples in their own life or what to strive for, what to do. And so what can we do to actually help support BAME teachers when they're already in the school to promote their career progression and help them think about that? Nicole, I'll start with you this time.
Okay, so first of all, you need to recognize what the data is out there telling us about BAME staff and the fact that they face greater barriers in comparison to their white colleagues. What we need to do is have a good career progression systems in place for these staff. We have to have an environment, a culture where it's very supportive. In my experience, it's networking with people, reaching out beyond your own school, beyond your community, and talk to somebody and kind of broaden your experience about what you need to do and create opportunities and make that known in a very structured way. So, this is what you need to do in order to achieve this, and make it that very clear and very transparent. So have a tiered system put in place so they know very clearly what is it that they need in order to progress further, or what professional development they may need to strengthen their experience. And just be supportive and be open, and don't make judgments, and question yourself as that leader and say, am I doing the right thing? If it was somebody else, would I be asking myself those questions? Would I be doing this? Why am I coming to that conclusion? And it's by being more knowledgeable and being a more informed leader, or if you're in charge of recruitment, is you making yourself more knowledgeable about diversity and how we're going to encourage that, and what you need to do as an individual to support that. And you have to come to that conclusion yourself in order to support that in your organisation. So it's being on top and putting these systems and structuring in place to support these individuals.
Can I just jump in there and say that I think that schools, these barriers that that BAME staff are facing, it's happening both at entry level into the profession. It's happening at leadership level too. There's still barriers with progression, and I think that schools can sort of try and combat that by really looking at their existing staff, looking internally, and look at staff who may not yet have the experience in the roles that they aspire to have, and support their career development. You tend to see sort of BAME staff in more support staff roles, TAs, midday supervisors, lunch supervisors, but then the more you look at, the leadership type of roles in schools, I think it's about 92.9% of head teachers are from a white background, and only 1% from Black or ethnic minority background. And it's something that schools really need to look at, sort of developing their existing staff. They have ambitions too, and they want to progress, and really look into supporting them. One of the ways that they can be supported is through mentorship, coaching, increased opportunities for networking, and also look at work shadowing. Having active allies in the profession can be a really great benefit. So I think this can all lead to retaining a diverse workforce as well. No one wants to be employed based on the colour of, just solely based on the colour of their skin, just to meet a quota. I think that once you've recruited the staff that you're seeking to recruit, making active changes to retain them, and it will also help to increase staff morale, I think, and which will instill a culture that's inclusive and make staff feel that they're part of a school where they feel valued for their skill sets. Yeah.
And Karen, maybe just tying into this, we got a question from the audience. One of them asked, a lot of the staff in schools who are BAME are actually support staff, and how do you also include them in your support of actually promoting, maybe helping them build their careers in education?
Yeah, so at Victorious, we have got a real raft of evidence of staff across our trust who have worked their way up, who have had promotions, and through CPD we've supported them in gaining additional qualifications. We've got all at all levels. So we've had volunteers who have become TA1, TA2. We've had TA2s moving up to the Hilter role. We've had Hilters who have then become unqualified teachers, and a couple who are now on the degree course, and we're using our apprenticeship levy to support that development. So we have a real focus on upskilling our staff at all times. Of course, that is always through choice. So nobody is forced to, be moving up the ranks all the time. We don't want people to feel that they can't rest in the position they're in if that's where they're comfortable and the role that they want to fulfill. But equally, the option is there at all times and well supported should people wish to access professional development at that significant level. So that is uniform across the trust. I think that for BAME employees that there are two prongs that we need to try and add in, and I'm really going to possibly repeat slightly Kemi and Nicole's thoughts, but I think there are two things that we need to do. One is through collaboration and staffing networks, and again, in my trust, we thrive on that. We have so many different groups. Some of them are formed at trust level, so it might be subject leader groups, senior leader groups, admin teams getting together, facilities management. So some of them are fairly structured at a formal level from the trust, but also we have a number of groups where staff from the different schools have formed those groups themselves for whatever and under whatever remit they have found to be useful. And I think that for BAME employees, that two things would be useful. One is being able to network with other members of staff in our schools, and particularly in our schools, because they are underrepresented. I'm absolutely honest and open about that. And so some of the difficulties they might experience, some of the emotions they might feel, having somebody from a very similar set of circumstances in many ways would be a real support, because it's nice to be able to share those difficulties, those challenges. But I also feel that it is really important that then, you know, statistically we know leaders are predominantly white, and actually there's been historical information that often there is a thread with families. So many people in education, there was a report not so long back that showed that many white British leaders have come from families who have been in the education system year on year on year on year. It is quite common for kind of education to run through a family background, and that wasn't the case with BAME employees. And this was, I can't remember the exact source of the report, but it was saying that BAME educators don't have that kind of perhaps that a lot of white British people do. And I think it's really important that we challenge that, and that BAME employees are supported by people who maybe have had those experiences, who have been encouraged throughout their life to get into education, to strive forward. And I think there are groups in schools, senior leaders, CPD development, people that we have in school who have a real key role in talking to the BAME employees and making them aware of those options and avenues that are there for them, that intrinsically many of our leaders from other backgrounds would know about, because they've seen it, they've lived it, they've experienced it around them. A lot of BAME employees, I think some of it is that they're not aware, they don't have that knowledge and understanding, and that is so important that that is highlighted to those members of staff, and that they're encouraged to take that path, because often culturally, and particularly for female members of our BAME community, there hasn't been a history, you know, in the recent past of women perhaps doing that maybe, and taking that role and really kind of progressing themselves professionally. To be honest, it's relatively new in history for white British women to do many of the things that white British women are doing now in terms of professional development, leadership, the roles that they are taking on. So, but it's even less embedded within the BAME community. And I think we really need to, in all elements for me, diversity, gender, everything, we've got to keep challenging it, we've got to keep encouraging it. And I think it's okay to identify pockets where that needs to be addressed, just as we do with women's salaries. Being, you know, just we know where we have these pockets, and it's okay to own that and say this is how we can challenge it. So I really feel we've got to be so conscious of that and make sure that BAME employees know the routes available to them, the skills and expertise that we can develop, and to have that courage and determination and self-belief to access that professional development.
Oren, you're on mute.
Sorry, a lot of sirens in the background, so I had to mute. So thank you for that, Karen. I know that this was supposed to end at 11:15, so we're running a bit over time. I hope you can stay on for another 5 minutes. There were a few questions that we got before the webinar that we wanted to cover. And so we'll try to run through them a bit faster. One person asked, should you suspend recruitment if you're not happy with the diversity of the group of applicants you've received? Nicole, maybe this ties into some of what you were talking about earlier, where you're very adamant about what you want to receive as applications. And so how would you answer this question?
Well, I wouldn't suspend a child's learning because I haven't got the right teacher to teach them. You know, the children's learning comes first and foremost, and that's what I will prioritise. And then I will reflect on why this recruitment didn't attract the candidates that I wanted to attract, and then address it from there. So I you know, everything will come. My first and foremost decision will be based on the need of my school and the children that I serve, and addressing their need first, and is to have a good education. And then I will address the issue around recruitment and unpick why, in the first place, this post did not attract the right candidate, the candidate I set out to, in my intention to attract, and then evaluate it from there.
Okay, brilliant. And Karen, question about NQTs for you. How do you increase the diversity of recruiting kind of young teachers starting in the profession?
Yeah, I think obviously all the things that we've talked about in terms of the administration and the process of the recruitment is key. I think the locality is more of a thing these days, like where that is our problem. And NQTs are coming from a variety of sources. So again, moving back, you know, not that many years ago, you were sourcing NQTs from universities. Pretty much that was the mainstream of your supply chain. That's very different now, but I do think that many NQTs will stay where their home is. Again, there are socio-economic factors influencing that. When I came out of university, I was very lucky because actually we could go and we could rent somewhere. It wasn't that long before you could actually, you know, put a small deposit on a property if you worked hard enough and you were in teaching. And, you know, that's not the case anymore. These youngsters, you know, are staying at home into young mid-adulthood. So I think, again, often that the recruitment of NQTs is very, is very localized. And I think we really need to broaden the networks that we talked about earlier, that Nicole mentioned as well, and see how we can support a bit of movement of where these NQTs are coming from, and get, you know, we want some NQTs from London who've lived a diverse life, who can come and share all of that with some of my children up here. And, you know, I have one school that's, you know, so rural, really, essentially, it's massively deprived and raw, and it would be amazing, but of course that then has additional costs, and we could go on forever, couldn't we? But, you know, teachers' salaries and them being able to kind of get themselves a home and live and work in another area, those two things don't necessarily go together particularly well these days. I'm not saying we've ever been awash with money as teachers, but certainly I was in a stronger position than my 18-year-old daughter is now, in terms of making those next steps into young adulthood. I am quite old, obviously, that.
And lastly, question that came in before the webinar, and Kemi, you spoke about it a bit, and Nicole spoke about it as well. Like, what can we do to acknowledge that unconscious bias does exist? What can we do to kind of overcome it ourselves and help others in the processes that we manage overcome it?
I think firstly that there needs to be a willingness to acknowledge bias, and where our own biases stem from. It should be approached with complete honesty and transparency. People tend to develop their own bias based on their own lived experiences, I find, and that these can be worked on, so that you approach decision making with a scrutinized self-awareness and really acknowledge your own unconscious bias. In doing so and in time, I think that people find that they're in a better position to source candidates for roles based on merit and not just on their background and character. So I think it's, yeah, acknowledging your own bias, owning it, and working on reducing that when it comes to you making decisions about recruitments.
Nicole, you mentioned earlier that if you remove some heuristics, people will use others. So what can you do about it? You're muted now.
Sorry, can you, yes, my connection is getting really bad.
You mentioned earlier that if you remove some characteristics, then people will find others to generalize from. So what can you do to overcome these things?
I guess it's educating yourself, Oren. It's as recruiters, you need to educate yourself about what does that mean? Having a diverse staff, what does that mean to you? Having a diverse group of people working for your organisation, what does that mean? And what are your values around that? And then I think that's you take it from there. It's about educating yourself as a leader, as a recruiter, and then you'll know when to do the right thing. It's like doing your own self-assessment around what do I need to do as the head of a recruitment company, and how do I go about doing that? And I think that will help to answer some of the questions that we still have unanswered.
Brilliant. So I think run over by a few minutes, but thank you everyone for joining us. There are a lot of really good ideas and discussion points that came up, like how do you recruit from further afield, not just from your local area? How do we start encouraging people to get into teaching earlier so that there is a more diverse pool? How do we create the opportunities for the leaders who are recruiting to actually educate themselves and become more aware of the need for diversity and of unconscious bias? And then how do we increase the opportunities for people once they're already into the role by creating groups, providing clear career progression and other ideas that we discussed? So we really, really appreciate your time, Karen, Kemi, and Nicole.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone.
Very busy. And thank you for contributing to this important discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.